check landed on the table in front of me like it had been dropped from a great height. I stared at it. $12,416.80. I remember the 80 cents specifically. I don't know why. Maybe because everything else about that night was so enormous, so crushing, that my brain held on to the smallest, most absurd detail just to stay afloat. My son was already pushing back his chair. "Mom, we're going to wait outside. Just take care of that, okay?" He said it the way you'd ask someone to take out the trash. Casual, like it was nothing, like I was nothing. I looked at him. I looked at him. I looked at my daughter-in-law who was already reaching for her coat. I looked at the 18 people around that table. People I had never met before in my life, people who had just finished eating the best meal of my year, possibly my decade, and I said nothing. My mouth opened and then closed again, like a fish. That was 3 months ago, and I have thought about that moment every single day since. Let me back up. My name is not important. What's important is this. I am 64 years old. I taught third grade for 31 years in the same school district in Columbus, Ohio. I retired 4 years ago when my niece started telling me the truth about my age. My husband, Ray, passed 8 years back, heart attack, quick, no warning, and since then it has just been me in the house we bought together in 1987. The house that still has his workbench in the garage and his coffee mug on the shelf because I cannot bring myself to move it. I have one son. I'll call him my son because that's what he is, though some days the word feels like it belongs to a different story than the one I'm living. He's 39. He works in real estate development. He married his wife. I'll call her my daughter-in-law, which she is, technically, 6 years ago. She comes from money. Not obscene money, but comfortable money. The kind of money where you don't check the price before you order, where you assume someone else will handle the details. I was never that kind of money. My teacher's pension is just over $1,100 a month. I have savings, 32 years of careful saving, of skipping vacations and driving the same car too long and buying the generic brand, but I don't touch them if I can help it. That money is for emergencies. That money is for the hospital, for the furnace, for the things you can't predict. I say all of this because I need you to understand exactly what $12,000 means to me. It means nearly a year of groceries. It means the property taxes I was still paying off from last year. It means security, safety. The difference between independence and asking my son for help. And my son knew all of that. He has always known. It was a Tuesday in September when he called. I remember because I was watching the evening news and eating leftover soup and feeling actually quite content. It was one of those quiet evenings I'd learned to appreciate after Ray died. Not lonely, just still. "Mom." His voice was warm. It had that particular warmth it gets when he wants something. I recognized it. I had recognized it since he was 7 years old and wanted to stay up past his bedtime. "I wanted to invite you to dinner this Saturday. Just a small thing. Me, you, Kristen, maybe a couple of her relatives who are in from out of town." "Oh," I said, "that sounds nice. Nothing fancy," he said. "Just dinner." I asked if I should bring anything. He said no, just myself. I asked how many people. He said maybe 6, 8 at most. I said I'd be there. I spent the rest of the week looking forward to it. I bought a new blouse. Nothing extravagant. Just something that wasn't a cardigan. I got my hair blown out at the salon on Friday, which I do maybe 3 times a year. I was happy. My son was including me. That sounds like a small thing, maybe, but you have to understand, since his marriage, my invitations had grown fewer and farther between. Holidays, yes. Birthdays, sometimes. But spontaneous dinners, it had been a long time. I should have asked more questions. I know that now. I should have asked the name of the restaurant. I should have asked exactly whose relatives. I should have done a lot of things differently, starting approximately 38 years ago, when I let my son's charm talk me out of every reasonable limit I ever tried to set. But I didn't. So, the restaurant was called Harlow's. I knew of it. Everyone in Columbus knows of it. But I had never been inside. It is the kind of place with a sommelier who talks to you like a close friend, and a menu with no prices on the women's copy. It is the kind of place where the tablecloths are ironed, where the bread arrives warm in a little cloth napkin, where you feel, walking in, like you've been upgraded to a life you didn't quite earn. I arrived at 6:45, 15 minutes early, the way my mother raised me. The hostess led me to a private dining room in the back. There were already people there. Not 6, not 8. I counted later. 22. I stood in the doorway, my new blouse with my purse clutched in both hands, and I looked at 22 people in an elegantly lit room and I thought. My son said 6 to 8. He was at the far end of the table. He waved when he saw me. Smiled that smile. The Ray smile, the one that used to make me forgive everything, and gestured to an empty chair near the middle. Mom, you made it. Come sit. As if I were late. As if the problem were my timing. His wife came over and kissed my cheek. She smelled like expensive perfume and her nails were freshly done. She introduced me to people whose names I immediately lost. Her aunt from Charlotte, her cousin and his wife, her college roommate, that roommate's husband, someone's business partner, someone's business partner, someone's boyfriend. Face after face after face, all polite, all briefly interested, all strangers. I sat down. I smiled. I ordered the salmon because it seemed like the most reasonable thing on the menu, and I drank one glass of white wine because my hands needed something to hold. Around me the table buzzed and roared. Steaks were ordered. Bottles of wine appeared and disappeared. Someone ordered a Chateaubriand for the table. The laughter was loud and easy. The laughter of people who are comfortable, who are not counting anything. I talked to the woman next to me, one of my daughter-in-law's cousins, a dental hygienist from Dayton, for most of the meal. She was perfectly pleasant. She had no idea who I was beyond Kristen's mother-in-law. I had no idea who she was beyond someone who had just ordered the $42 halibut. I told myself it was fine. I told myself it was a family gathering, a big one, European style, the kind where everyone piles in and it's chaotic and warm, and that's the point. I told myself my son had perhaps misjudged the numbers, that things had grown beyond what he planned. I told myself a lot of things. The dessert menus came, people ordered, souffles, a cheese course, 2 bottles of dessert wine for the far end of the table. The dental hygienist ordered the chocolate lava cake and then, when it arrived, ate 2 bites and left the rest. I had coffee. And then the server appeared at my son's elbow and murmured something, and my son nodded, and the server walked away, and my son looked down the table at me. Mom, conversational, easy. Could you handle the check when it comes? Kristen and I have the babysitter until 10, and we need to get going soon. The room kept talking around me. No one else heard. Or if they heard, they didn't react. I said, I'm sorry. The check, he said. Just put it on your card. We'll sort it out later. I looked at him for a long moment. How much is it? I asked. He shrugged. It shouldn't be too bad. We'll talk later, okay? I'll call you tomorrow. He stood up. My daughter-in-law was already gathering her things. They made their rounds, quick hugs, brief goodbyes, the practice choreography of people leaving a party they hosted but did not pay for. And then they were gone. I sat at that table in my new blouse and I waited. The check came in a leather folder placed at my elbow by a server who did not make eye contact. I opened it. $12,416.80. I sat with that number for what felt like a very long time. The table was still full of people, still talking, still laughing, the coffee cups refilling, someone at the far end starting a new story. Nobody looked at me. Nobody reached for the folder. Nobody said, let me help with that, or what do I owe, or oh my goodness, is everything all right? I thought about Ray. Specifically, I thought about something he said to me once, early in our marriage when we were still learning who each other was. We were at a dinner with some friends of his from work, and afterward, walking to the car, I had said that I'd felt invisible all evening. And he'd stopped on the sidewalk and looked at me very seriously and said, the moment you feel invisible is the moment you decide whether you're going to disappear or not. I had not thought about that in years. I thought about it then. I flagged down the server. I'm sorry, I said. Could you do me a favor? Could you separate out my check, just the salmon and the coffee, from the rest of this? And could you bring the remainder to the table for the other guests to divide among themselves? The server blinked. Of course, he said. Absolutely. The salmon was $44. The coffee was $6. I added a 22% tip because that is what Ray always did, and old habits are love letters to the dead. My total was $61 and change. I paid. I gathered my coat. And then I stood up, and I raised my voice just enough to be heard at a table of 20 people, and I said, excuse me, everyone. The bill for the rest of the evening is being split among the table. The server will come around. It was lovely to meet you all. Then I walked out. I sat in my car in the parking garage for 11 minutes. I know because I watched the clock on the dashboard. I was not crying exactly. My eyes were wet, but I was not crying. There's a difference. Crying is loud and loose. This was something quieter. Something that had been waiting a long time to be felt. My phone rang at 9:52. My son. I let it go to voicemail. He called 3 more times that night. My daughter-in-law called once. I put the phone on the charger and went to bed and lay in the dark with my eyes open, looking at the ceiling Ray and I had both looked at for 26 years. I did not sleep well. In the morning, I made coffee. I sat at the kitchen table with Ray's old mug. I don't use it, just keep it there. And I let myself think clearly about what had happened. Not emotionally. Clearly. My son had lied to me about the size of the dinner. He had seated me at a table full of his wife's relatives without preparation or warning. He had allowed me to sit through a 3-hour meal in which I knew virtually no one. And then he had left, instructing me to pay a bill he knew I could not comfortably afford, using the language of temporary inconvenience. We'll sort it out later, which in my experience is the language people use when they intend to sort out nothing at all. I thought about the fact that he had not called me in the 2 weeks before the dinner. I thought about the fact that the invitation had been warm and specific and last minute in the way that calculated things often are. I thought about the fact that when I asked how many people, he said 6 to 8. He knew. He knew exactly. My son had used me, not for the first time. This was the part that sat heaviest, because when I really let myself look at it, clearly, without the soft focus of motherhood, I could see that this was not an isolated incident. It was a pattern. The money I'd lent him 5 years ago to cover a gap in a real estate deal, which he paid back 18 months late and never mentioned again. The times his wife had asked me to babysit with almost no notice, always framed as a favor I'd surely want to do. The Christmas 2 years ago when they'd come to my house, eaten my food, opened gifts I'd bought for their children, and left without offering to help clean up. Small things, individually. Together, a portrait. I had painted myself into it. That was the part I could not escape. I had made it easy. I had smiled and absorbed and not said the things I should have said because I was afraid of the wrong thing. I was afraid of being difficult. I was afraid of being the mother-in-law they complained about. I was afraid of less access to my grandchildren. I was afraid of my son withdrawing the warmth he gave me in careful, rationed doses. I had traded my self-respect for scraps of love, and the thing about scraps is that they never fill you up. My son came to the house 4 days later. He did not call first, just knocked, which is something he started doing after his marriage rather than using his key. I had always hated that. The knock said, "I am a guest here." The key said, "I am your son." I let him in. He sat at the kitchen table where I had had my clear-headed morning. He looked uncomfortable, which I noted without sympathy. He had brought nothing, no coffee, no flowers, none of the small offerings people bring when they know they've done wrong. "Mom," he started. "About Saturday night." "I'm listening," I said. He talked for a while. It was not an apology exactly. It was an explanation, which is what people offer when they want forgiveness without accountability. He said Kristen's family had been excited about the dinner and the numbers had grown. He said he had assumed I would be happy to help out. He said he had planned to pay me back. He still planned to pay me back, he insisted, though he didn't say when or how much or what pay back meant, given that I had not paid anything to be paid back. I waited until he finished. "I paid $61 on Saturday night," I said. "That was my meal and my tip. I asked the restaurant to divide the rest of the check among the other guests." He stared at me. "You didn't," he started. "I did," I said. "Mom, those were Kristen's family. You made them pay." "Yes," I said. "They ate the food. It seems reasonable." He rubbed his face with both hands. He said something about how embarrassing it had been, how Kristen's aunt had texted Kristen that night, how people had been caught off guard. "I was caught off guard," I said. "I was told there would be 6 to 8 people. There were 22. I was handed the check for over $12,000 by my son on his way out the door. I imagine that was also somewhat embarrassing for you to do." He was quiet for a moment. "I just thought," he started. "I know what you thought," I said, and I did know. He thought what he had always thought, that I would absorb it, that the shape of me, the particular softness I had spent 64 years cultivating in the name of love and peace and keeping the family together, meant I could always be pressed into service. Thus I would smile and pay and cry privately and answer his next call warmly and let it become another thing we didn't talk about. He was not wrong to think it. He had 39 years of evidence. "I love you," I said. "I want you to hear that first before I say the rest because I need it to be true before anything else." He looked at me. Something shifted in his face. Some younger version of him surfaced briefly, the one who used to fall asleep in the car on the way home from my parents' house, and I'd carry him inside. "I have spent a lot of years making myself small so that you'd have room," I said. "Room to grow, room to be right, room to need things and have them given. That was my choice. I don't regret most of it. But I am done now. Not done loving you. Done being a resource." He said my name. I'm not a bank, I said. I'm not a babysitter on call. I'm not the person who absorbs the awkward situations so that you don't have to. I am your mother. And your mother, it turns out, has limits. He left an hour later. We had talked more about money, about expectations, about the specific ways I needed things to change if we were going to remain close. He was not comfortable. Neither was I. But comfortable had not been working. Comfortable had been its own kind of damage. It has been 3 months. Things are different, not fixed. I don't think the word fixed applies to the complicated architecture of a relationship between a mother and her adult son, but different. He calls more often now. Not to ask for things, just to call. Last month he asked me if I wanted to get lunch, just the two of us, at a diner near my house that I've always liked. We ate club sandwiches and talked about Ray, which we almost never do. And he told me a story about his father that I hadn't heard before, and I laughed until my eyes watered. It was the best afternoon I'd had in a long time. My daughter-in-law still keeps a careful distance. That may be how things remain. I have made peace with that particular corner of the situation. My grandchildren call me Grandma Bev. No, wait, that's someone else's story. They call me what they call me, and when I hear it, I feel exactly what I always feel. That particular variety of love that requires nothing, that just is. The $61 receipt is still in my purse. I kept it, not as a trophy. I'm not that kind of person, but as a reminder. A reminder that the smallest, most dignified choice I ever made cost me less than most people spend on a nice dinner out. That walking out of a room does not require a grand speech. That the moment you feel invisible is, in fact, the moment you get to decide. Ray knew that. He knew it before I did. I think I'm catching up. I still have that receipt. It's folded in the inside pocket of my purse, behind my library card and the little laminated photo of Ray I've carried for 8 years. $61 and change. Most people spend more than that on a Saturday night without thinking twice. But that receipt means something to me that I can't quite put into words, except to say that it represents the first decision in a very long time that I made entirely for myself. What happened that night at Harlow's didn't come out of nowhere. I understand that now. The check landing in front of me, my son walking out the door, the 22 strangers finishing their dessert while I sat there doing the math. None of it was an accident. It was the end result of a long, slow accumulation of choices. His choices, yes. But mine too. Every time I had absorbed something I should have named. Every time I had smiled when I should have spoken. Every time I told myself that keeping the peace was the same thing as keeping the love. It isn't. I know that now in a way I didn't before. There's something I've been thinking about since that night. Something that doesn't have a clean name but that I understand in my bones. When you consistently act against your own sense of what's right in order to avoid discomfort, you don't actually avoid anything. You just delay it and let it grow larger in the dark. The discomfort I avoided for 39 years showed up anyway, in a leather folder, on a Tuesday night in September. It just cost a lot more by the time it arrived. And here's the thing about that. I am not angry at my son in the way I expected to be. I was at first, but what I feel now is something closer to clarity. Because what happened forced me to look honestly, not emotionally, but honestly, but the full picture of who I had been in this relationship and who I wanted to be going forward. That kind of looking takes something. It takes a willingness to sit with what you see, even when it isn't flattering. It takes the courage to say, I was part of this. Not all of it, but part of it. What I did in that restaurant wasn't brave in any grand sense. I asked the server to split a check. That's all. But it required something I had been talked out of for years. A clear-eyed decision, made in a moment of pressure, grounded in what I actually knew to be right rather than what was easiest. And then I stood up and said something true in front of strangers and I walked out, and I sat in my car for 11 minutes and let myself feel it. That is something, not everything, but something. My son and I are finding our way to something new. It is slower and more careful than what we had before, but I think it is more honest. And I have learned, finally, at 64, that honest and uncomfortable is worth more than warm and hollow. That the love worth having is the kind that can withstand the truth of who you both actually are. Ray knew that. He lived it. And I think, in his patient way, he spent 26 years trying to teach it to me. I think I'm finally ready to learn.